This video teaches you how to use mloginfo, which is part of mtools. mloginfo is a script that parses MongoDB log files and prints out summarized information about what was going on in your MongoDB instance. In its most basic form, mloginfo just gives back general information like the numbers of lines in the log file, the start and end date, the version, and if you use the MongoD or MongoS binary. mloginfo also has different sections which give additional information. If you're interested in opening and closing connections in the log file, then you might want to look at the connections section. There are also sections that analyze queries, restarts of the server, and so on. Let's start by looking at the help that mloginfo provides. mloginfo takes one or several log files as its positional argument. There are some general optional arguments, and you can use one or several specialized sections as listed here. Running mloginfo without any additional options returns the file name, the start and end date of the log file, the date format, the number of lines, and, if available in the log file, if it was a MongoD or MongoS log, and the version. The last two fields can only be detected if there was a restart in the log file. If there was no restart in the log file, mloginfo still tries to infer the version. It does so by looking at the timestamp format, because that changed over the different versions. And so you will be able to at least see if it was a 2.4 or 2.6 major version. Now I'd like to go through the individual sections and show you what they're doing and what kind of information they print out. We'll start with the connections section. Again, I run mloginfo with the log file and add -- connections at the end. In addition to the general information up here, we now also have the connections section down here below. The connections section gives a summary of the opened and closed connections total numbers, how many unique IPs it found, if there were any socket exceptions, and then a list per IP address how many connections were opened and closed from this IP. This information is useful if you need to find out what servers connected to the database, or if you're chasing down some connection issues. Next, I want to talk about the distinct section. With the -- distinct option, mloginfo goes through the log file and tries to group all the lines together by their type. It then gives an overview of how many events of a certain type it found, omitting the specific information for each line and just showing the general log line, and this list is sorted by number of occurrences. This is an interesting view that gives you an idea of what's going on in the log file without going into the details. So not surprisingly, we see a lot of connections being opened and closed. There were also some connection issues where the server couldn't connect to another host. And we see socket exceptions, although a lot less than the could not connect to message. There were some replica set state changes as well. There have been 3 shutdowns, as we can see here with these messages. And then also some individual messages that only occurred once. Grouping together the lines of the log file by their type is not 100% reliable. And in fact, you can see down here that the distinct mode couldn't match 50 lines in this file. By default, they are not printed, but if you want to see what couldn't be matched, you can run the same command with additional -- verbose, and it will print out certain lines that couldn't be grouped together. The next section is the queries section, and I would argue that this is one of the most useful ones that mloginfo offers. It outputs statistics of the query patterns that it finds. Let me show you an example. Unfortunately, with this large font size, the line breaks make it hard to read, but I'm just going to select this text and then I'll copy it into a text editor where I can disable the line break. So I've just copied the output of the run into a text editor that doesn't have a line break enabled, and now we can read the information. So mloginfo -- queries outputs a table with several columns. The first one is the namespace, and this is the usual syntax database.collection name. The next column is the pattern or query shape. It's a simplified version of your query where the values have been replaced by simple ones so that we can group together queries that are on similar fields but still on different values. Over to the right, we have the statistics of these queries. We have a column for the number of queries that were found in a log file, the count, the minimum time it took to answer the query in milliseconds, the maximum time, the average, a 95th percentile, and finally the sum of all queries summed up together. The list is ordered by the last column, by the total time it took to answer this particular query. This list is quite useful to figure out what kind of indexes you need or are missing in your database. Looking at the last column, this first query shape spent the most amount of time overall, probably more than all the others together. But it was only run 20 times versus the next ones, which were executed a lot more often. We also see that the minimum time was a lot higher than the other queries that were recorded. The reason for that is that this particular query contains a negation, a $ne, and those are known to be inefficient for index use. So if you find that your database is not running with the performance you would expect, then mloginfo -- queries is definitely a good way of looking at the log files, trying to figure out where it spends the time to answer queries. And just as an additional info, this is not just queries, but also the query portions of updates, which are also included in this statistic. mloginfo -- queries has one additional parameter, and that's the next one here in the list, --sort, which only applies to the queries section. By default, as I mentioned, it is sorted by the last column, the sum of total time spent. With this flag, you can change the sort order and use any of the other columns. Finally, let's look at the restart section. By adding --restarts to the command, mloginfo goes through the log file and detects all the restarts and prints out additional information down here in this section when a restart occurred and with what version. This information can be useful if you had a upgrade that didn't go well, if you need to figure out when certain issues started occurring, maybe you up or downgraded to a version that wasn't performing as well. So this gives you an overview of when you upgraded or downgraded to certain versions. So I hope you find mloginfo useful. I use it all the time. It's usually my first command that I run if I have to analyze log files, just to get an overview of what I'm actually looking at. You'll get the information, the start and end time, the version usually, and then I drill down and go into one of the sections depending on what I'm looking for.